Hello and welcome to the Drexel interview. I'm your host, Paula Morantz-Cohen. And today our guest is Dr. Dan Gottlieb, family therapist, author, and host of the Philadelphia-based public radio show, Voices in the Family. Dr. Gottlieb, welcome to the Drexel interview.
Paula, it's nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Tell us about what it's like being the therapist for the city of Philadelphia and its surrounding suburbs.
If I ever considered myself that, I would not get out of bed in the morning.
In a sense, though, you are that. Do you realize that you're sort of the voice of, you're the voice that absorbs the angst of this region?
I don't want to be aware of that, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
What keeps me alive and vibrant is my sense of smallness and unimportance. I cling to my humility, and if for a moment I thought I had something that others don't have, I would feel terribly lonely forever.
Well, you are such a wonderful listener, and I guess that's part of that sense of humility. I understand, and I think that part of what people respond to in you is the sense that you have been through or understand what they're going through. And that's a wonderful gift.
I understand alienation. I have felt it for the bulk of my life. I think that is what causes most of the suffering I see in my office and I read about in the paper.
Alienation. Mm-hmm. How do you define that precisely?
Frieda Fromm-Reichmann, the famous analyst, right before World War II, said alienation is the cause of most human suffering. And I think it's worse today than it was then, even in Germany right before World War II.
Really? That's quite a statement.
It's a sense of being connected, disconnected. It's a sense of not being part of something larger. There's an ache inside. I think it's part of being human. There's an ache inside to be understood by something larger and to feel part of, to feel accepted by. We don't have that in this world, despite the fact that it's getting smaller, and we certainly don't have it in this culture. I read a statistic several years ago coming out of the federal government that said 3 out of 5 families move every 5 years. Mm. That alone explains a sense of alienation, a sense of disconnection.
Yeah,
we grew up in communities where, you know, Aunt Sophie was right around the corner. And, you know, you trusted her with all your problems with the kids, and your parents were around the other corner. We don't have it anymore.
Well, do you feel this is something that's been a while coming, been gradual, or also do you feel there have been, the cataclysmic event of 9/11, of course, probably brought home to many people a sense of dislocation and alienation that was extreme. How do you see these two things? Is this something rather sudden, or is it a gradual evolution?
I think it's both. I think it has been evolving for probably many generations. I think what 9/11 did was confronted us with our own mortality and vulnerability. You know, there's a theoretical model about what it means to be human that says we are the only species on Earth that knows we're going to die. Mm. And we wrestle with that forever. And we construct our own reality. Many religions have been constructed, many cultures, many belief systems have been constructed to protect us from that truth.
You feel we repress that as a society?
Well, the theory is that we do repress it. We must repress it in order to put one foot in front of the other. And what 9/11 did was confronted us with our own vulnerability. And there's a great deal of research that shows that when we're confronted with our own vulnerability, we tend to cling to our beliefs more tightly. We tend to gather in smaller circles with people who are like us and discriminate against others. And the more confronted we are, the more vulnerable we feel, the more primitive our beliefs become, so that they ultimately get reduced to good and evil.
Interesting.
And we're good and they're evil.
Well, it sounds to me like you're saying two things, one good and one bad. One, that sense of community has kicked in. The necessity of having a group, which you said is why people feel alienated. On the other hand, the group, if it's too much like ourselves, can be dangerous as well.
That's right, that's right. We have the illusion that we are a group in this country, that this is the American way. But look at the electorate.
It's so polarized.
It's as polarized as any election I can remember in my lifetime.
You sound pessimistic.
I'm frightened, is what I am. What we long for as humans is to be part of a larger community, to be accepted. When we're frightened, our instinct as animals is to close our hearts off, to go into corners where it feels safe with our own. What that does in the long run is it makes us feel more alienated and more frightened. And that if we were able to do what's counterintuitive, that when we feel frightened and alienated, open our hearts, meet other people, invite them into our lives, invite ourselves into theirs, find out where they're suffering, tell them where we suffer, then we'll feel safe.
Can you be more concrete about, I mean, obviously you get calls all the time and you give advice, and I suppose I'm asking you to give both particularized advice for the individual alienated person and advice on the larger scale for the culture?
Years ago, I treated a woman who was severely depressed. Because of her body chemistry, she couldn't tolerate the side effects of any of the antidepressants. Her job was stressful, and she asked me my thoughts about a leave of absence from her job. This is a bad thing, having a depressed person take a leave of absence from a job. It can make you more depressed, more time to think, which is never a good
dangerous.
Thing. Dangerous. Thinking is dangerous. So,
to be avoided wherever possible.
Right, yes, right. I said to her, I'll make you a deal. I'll sign the form for leave of absence if you devote 10 hours a week to helping living beings. I don't care if it's children or older people or animals. You go help living beings that need your help. She did. The depression eased up over time, and eventually she was able to tolerate the antidepressants. That helping others, I believe, actually changed her body chemistry.
That's fascinating.
And the science shows that helping others raises one's endorphins, one's natural antidepressants. I think that's what we need to do. And I think in general, if we feel unloved, we need to love better. If we feel disconnected, we have to connect. If we feel wounded, we have to help others with their wounds. And that's how healing happens.
I take it you speak from personal experience. You yourself were in a serious accident, life-threatening one, and you, I imagine, it caused depression as well as physical debilitation. Could you address that process, how you worked your way through it? I mean, I imagine that some of the things you're saying must have entered in.
I went through a clinical depression, a major depression about 4 years after the accident, after the shock wore off. And unfortunately, I couldn't take medication either. I had a bad side effect with my quadriplegic. I was in therapy. I was in therapy for several years, and I think that helped. It helped me to grow more comfortable inside my skin. At the same time, in the midst of this, I was approached by Marty Moss Coane, who at the time was the producer of a show called Family Matters. And she asked me if I wanted to be the host. Now, if my judgment was intact, I probably would have said no because I'm too depressed and insecure to do something like that. But I said yes. And I think it was in part that show that helped me through my depression. My insecurity and vulnerability were palpable. And I was actually afraid to tell the audience that I was a quadriplegic.
You didn't tell them right away?
Not right away, no. But over time, we did a show on learning disabilities. And I told the audience that I had a learning disability and as a result did very poorly in school. My academic history is, we don't want to talk about that.
Okay.
And I felt better. I felt the more I opened up, the more I felt connected with the audience who I never met. About a month later, we had Teddy Pendergrass on, the well-known rhythm and blues singer who is also a quadriplegic. And it was in that show that I opened up about my quadriplegia and the emotional consequences of it. And the callers were incredible. It's like I gave them invitation to open up to me. And I felt incredibly close, incredibly intimate, and very well connected with all of these invisible people. I felt part of community. And I think that, by and large, helped me out of my depression. It wasn't what I was doing for them, it was what they were doing for me. And to this day, anytime anyone asks for my help, I feel honored.
Well, it sounds like the radio was a unique forum for you, too, that you found your medium, you found your voice in a literal and metaphorical sense. What is it about radio, do you think? Do you think it's particular to your creative kind of therapy that you're able to do things on the radio that perhaps you're not able to do in other, through other methods?
Partly. I mean, you know, I write a column for the Philadelphia Inquirer, too, and that's a whole different phenomenon for me. I think radio gives one a sense of privacy, anonymity, and especially public radio. Commercial radio, you've got to do what you do quickly and get out between commercials. On public radio, I mean, I can stay with a caller for 2, 3, 5 minutes. It's a long time. And I can ask them questions about their lives and help them tell their story. Can't do that on commercial radio.
Right. It is a unique forum in that regard.
Commercial radio is Q&A, you know.
Have there been callers, I mean, I was going to ask you this question and you lead into it, that were particularly memorable, that you stayed with quite a long time, longer than perhaps what would have been considered acceptable, certainly not on a commercial radio station, but even on public radio, that are memorable to you that you could tell us about?
This goes back about 15 years. What jumps to mind is before cell phones. A man pulled over, called from a phone booth, and wept, confessed for the first time to anyone about his infidelity and his conflict around that and his terrible guilt. And he didn't know what to do or how to do it or who to say what to whom. And he just wept on the air.
Were you able, do you think, to help him?
Help him feel less alone.
Yeah.
And
on the one hand, I suppose you have this opportunity for connection. On the other, I imagine there are times when you feel that you can't reach out. I mean, somebody might need help, and what can you do? I mean, you don't even know who the person is. Is there a sense of helplessness that you ever feel in your role speaking to people on the radio?
I think being a good therapist, I think being a good parent, being a good lover, is about learning to manage your helplessness and not